we're in a global economy. Like what happens somewhere, because they're all invested in each other and that, but what does this mean for Australia? Let's talk, the interest rate in Australia, the banks in Australia. Is this going to have a knock-on effect? Because they're talking about the contagion effect, etc. And how much does it flow down into affecting everyday Australians?
I would say not much.
Okay.
Look, we saw a blip in share prices of the major banks here in Australia, but only by 1, 2, maybe 2.5%. The regional banks perhaps double that. So not a major issue. There's no noticeable runs on deposits here, nor should there be. Look, I think a lot of people don't appreciate that the banking system in the United States is very different to the way it's structured in Australia, the United Kingdom, and many other countries. In the United States, there are a few large banks, but most banks are small regional banks. Many of them only have 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 offices or bank branches. And that's why there are so many bank failures, as I've already said, over 560 since 2001. Most of them are very small. They really don't have a ripple effect. What's happened here, of course, is a couple of very large banks have collapsed. And when I say collapsed, they still exist. They haven't disappeared. Silicon Valley Bank, for example, has temporarily been taken over by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And by the way, in the United States and in Australia and in some other countries, deposits are actually guaranteed by government or government instrumentalities, usually up to a limit, $250,000 in the United States. And in the United States, of course, the government has announced that they'll actually cover all of the depositors in Silicon Valley Bank. Now, one of the reasons for that is they generally encouraged only large depositors. 90% of their depositors actually had more than $250,000 deposited with Silicon Valley Bank. That's not the case here in Australia. Most people really are not risking anything by keeping their money deposited with either one of the large banks or one of the regional banks. Pretty much the same in most other of the high-income countries like the United Kingdom and Canada. New Zealand will be another case in point. So most people who are watching this podcast really don't have anything to fear.
Okay. And so let's put this in, continuing to talk a little bit about Australia for a few minutes. If Australia's interest rates go up, does that have the same effect on our banking system, or is ours structured slightly differently? Because obviously we've only got a couple of major banks, we've got a number of like building institutions and all those sorts of things, or building societies or whatever they're called. But how does this whole thing that's happening in the States, is it a risk also? I know you said that if a bank collapses in Australia, we as depositors aren't as much of a risk as in the United States, but is the system as similar risk to the United States?
No, it's not. The reason being, most of our banking is concentrated in the hands of 4 major banks, and then there's a few smaller banks. There are very few building societies in existence now because over a period of time, the central bank and government have actually encouraged those institutions to become banks. So most now have banking licenses. There still are a few building societies, and they come under a slightly different regulatory regime. But no, Australia's system is structured differently, and that's one reason why we survived the global financial crisis as well as we did. Australia didn't even fall into recession. We didn't officially fall into recession here, which was the case in many other countries.
So even if this is doom and gloom in America, which we kind of have alluded to that it's probably not, Australia is reasonably protected from this. We will be impacted by slower sales if we deal with international people? Maybe like what are some of the practical impacts on Australians?
Sure. Look, what's happening in Australia, as it is in many other countries, is that our central bank is increasing interest rates. And, for example, as people who are on fixed interest rate mortgages come off their fixed rate and onto flexible rates, their loan repayments are going to increase. And so they'll have less money to spend elsewhere. That should produce a slowdown in the economy. And that is what the central bank wants, right?
Yeah.
Because increasing interest rates ultimately is all about reducing the rate of growth in demand. Now, basically what that means is they want us all to be poorer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what it amounts to. And they have to do that because governments are simply spending too much money. There was a rapid increase in government spending during COVID. And look, I didn't oppose many of the initiatives that were undertaken. The problem is we're well and truly through the COVID pandemic and governments are still spending money. That's the problem. The biggest enemy we have is government spending. That's the biggest enemy. That's the biggest risk to our economy.
Hey, that was an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, put a comment below. And if you want to see more content like this, faith-based leadership development content, make sure you check out our channel, give it a subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you'll be notified when we release new content.